As a shop owner, it's really our job to foster the next generation in. I don't think that shutting down people with minimal experience right away is the answer. While there are outside sources that really could adjust and change the technician shortage for the better, I really think the biggest part of it is going to be played by us, the shop owners, the guys my age that are kind of coming up. We're kind of the torch holders right now, and if we don't assist these kids coming up and teach them the way, who else is there? Again, it's very hard to throw these kids in there because I can't convey 25 years of knowledge to somebody in 10 minutes.
Welcome to OBD AI Insights, where we explore the biggest shifts impacting independent shops. Mick Z, founder of OBD AI, and today we're joined by Justin Ross. He's the managing partner at Bolt Mechanics.
Actually, I just bought my partner out, so I am now the CEO and owner.
There you go. Well, congrats.
Thank you.
So yeah, our topic for today is how skilled auto repair technicians are going extinct. I mean, we'll unpack what's driving the technician shortage, how technology is shifting the landscape, and why, mobile models like Bolt might be the part of the solution. So Justin, before we get into the solutions, I want to start with your frontline perspective, pretty much your background. You've been in the managing, auto repair operations for over a decade. So, what led you to that? What was that progression through your career? And when did you first notice the technician shortage becoming a serious problem?
Been doing this professionally since I was 16. I'm 39 now, so I'm in almost just about 25 years now. I've been everything from, the guy sweeping the floors and changing oil to, uh, the suspension guy. I worked at a couple big boxes when I was younger. Never did the dealer thing. Got into the independent side. The dealer never really appealed to me. That was kind of like the high school of repair shops. It's all about who knows who's in good with this one to get this ticket and, so on and so on. They kind of just chew people up and spit them out. Myself and my former partner started this business about 9 years ago. I managed the shop that I was at prior, went from mechanic to service writer to manager. And then due to just, we'll say irreconcilable differences with the owner led to me leaving. And I kind of just met my partner by happenstance. His second cousin worked with a buddy of mine, and he was not an automotive guy. He was he was a finance guy, had some engineering background, was intelligent enough to see that the business was broken, but kind of foolish enough to think that he himself could fix it. And then a couple of years into it, he kind of realized that these problems that the industry suffers from across the board, technician shortage being a large part of that, but there are several other issues industry wide. They made it difficult, and he realized that, these aren't small problems that can be fixed at a one shop level. I mean, we started with the model of it being mobile repair. We quickly got away from it as a traditional mobile repair, as I kind of informed Adam based on my experience that to offer customers all the kind of assistance they really need with their cars, a lot of it is very difficult to do on the road. You're always going to need that one tool you don't have. You get into a jam in somebody's driveway, it's a little more of a troublesome than if it was at the shop. The shop, I have everything at my disposal to do what I need to do. So how we kind of rolled the mobile repair into that was what we did. I found over the years that a big part of the problem with why people are going at the mobile mechanics is timing. Mom's got to be at work, dad's got to be at work, kids got to be at school, and trying to reconcile all of that and get your car to somebody is kind of a pain. So kind of
Yeah.
what we did was offer a pickup and drop off service. So essentially, usually once you're at work for the day. So typically what we would do is we would, we targeted the larger offices in our area, and, kind of offered them a, try us out kind of deal. And it was well received, especially because where we are and where a lot of, the newer shops are popping up because the old ones are kind of being, I know in New York State, once they lose zoning variants after about 6 months. And a lot of them used to be like former gas stations, stuff like that. And the townships and stuff like that just can't wait to, they see it as a blight, broken down cars, and everybody still kind of sees mechanics as the guys from the 50s. They expect me to come out in coveralls with grease smudges on my face, and that's kind of what they think it's going to be. Broken down cars in the road. So as soon as the townships and the villages and this and that get the ability to shut down the zoning, it becomes very difficult to gain residential or industrial type zoning or all commercial type zoning. So we operate in an industrial area, and like most industrial areas, it's more of a former industrial area and kind of is a blighted area of the city that we operate in. And it also kind of takes away from people feeling uncomfortable, with the area that we're in. If I pick your car up and I drop it off to you, then, it doesn't really matter. They come to the shop. I mean, I have a 5,000 square foot shop. I mean, we keep it very clean. We get compliments all the time. People are like, wow, like I can't believe, because they're used to going in, and it's dirty. It smells like a shop. I mean, we
Yeah.
clean it out, we, 2 or 3 times a year. We pressure wash, get all the dust down because we use speedy dry, and tends to get all over everything. But we take pride in the fact that, we work clean in the shop, and that translates into how we work on the cars, and people see that, and they're usually pretty happy with how it turns out. But the pickup and drop off stuff was really well received because, again, it's hard to do everything you need to do in the morning and still try and get your car somewhere. Then you got to figure out how you're going to get back, everything else. So we kind of pick them up. Sometimes we'll diagnose and, set up another day if we have to get parts, or, if something comes up. We stay in good contact with the customers and kind of let them know what goes on. But that's kind of how we split it 50-50 with the mobile. You basically get the same, you get the same benefit as a customer, whereas I don't have to lay in your item for driveway. Wish I had that tool that I left in my toolbox. So, and then torches and stuff. And the cars are getting more and more, especially up here in the Rust Belt states, where I mean, some of these cars, stuff's just not going well. I could see the mobile thing working better out west, down south, where they don't have the rust problems. But it's very difficult to do it even on a lift with everything you have. Sometimes it's a fight. But I think that's kind of where we're at now. I mean, we have myself, and I have one long-term mechanic who's been with me for 6 years or so. And we pretty much run the show here. I got a girl that runs the office. That's new. It was my partner because he was never really an automotive guy. Again, he was just he saw it as a broken industry, and thought there was, money to be made. And he wasn't wrong, but his vision on how it operated and the reality were two different things. And he kind of
Right, yeah,
decided.
he just kinda saw it as like an opportunity, went in, but
Yeah, absolutely.
didn't
He
really know
thought,
what to do with it.
hey, like, can we do this better? This is really how he framed it to me when we had our first conversation. And I was like, it can absolutely be done better, getting away from the, selling flushes and, floor mat rotations or whatever fun stuff they're trying to upsell you at the big box stuff. And that's kind of where I'll roll into the beginning problems of the technician shortage. There's not a lot of guys left in the industry that really are capable of training these guys at these places because a lot of them are working independents. I mean, you get some dealership guys, but when I started, I had a couple guys that, really guided me and taught me. They were old school, true mechanics, whereas nowadays we're more technicians. I mean, I came up and I was working on I was on the precipice of the phase out of the carburetors. I got the tail end of those, and then started working on all the fun stuff when they went to CPI and TBI, and everybody was trying their own fuel injection that, was, a 5, 6 year run of just awful setups before they finally kind of got the fuel injection stuff. I think a lot of the guys kind of that did that realized that there was the ceiling at those places. They, like most places, they'll determine your value, and beyond a certain point, they're not going to pay you anymore, but they're going to expect more work out of you. And I think that pushed a lot of those guys out. So I think the few young guys that are in the industry are really suffering from a lack of guidance. I think another big problem with the guys coming up now is when I came up, you could do, it was simple suspension stuff, and diagnostics was pretty easy, basic stuff because of they were more and more basic. And as things have progressed, I would say, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a giant leap in technology. I mean, we went from, 5 or 6 modules. I mean, I had a Mercedes in here the other day that had like 65. It took me 25 minutes to run a
There's
health
a
report
module
on it.
for every
Yeah.
little function.
Yeah, every function, and then all it takes is a snipped CAN wire somewhere, and you're down an entire network. And I think it's much harder to throw somebody that's not well trained in that kind of stuff into a problem like that, because it's tough for me, having 25 years of experience, sometimes to diagnose this stuff, and to just expect these guys to come in and throw them in cold, because sure, there's breaks and a lot of that stuff, but a lot of that stuff is getting eaten up by the big box stores and stuff like that, because I mean, they have a better pricing setup than we do. They're allowed to, they buy 10,000 rotors at a time, which allows them to get them substantially cheaper than I can. They can make better money and still offer the customer cheaper stuff. So we've become kind of a triage unit. I'm kind of the guy that when everybody else is throwing every part they can find at it, and they really want to get it fixed, they bring it here. That's not to say that we don't have our brakes and suspension and stuff like that, but I'm finding more and more, you used to be able to replace I would say 7 times out of 10, you get an oxygen sensor code and it's an oxygen sensor. And those days are kind of gone. We've been joking, like mechanic and I, it's like the last 2 or 3 months, I haven't replaced a sensor. Every time it's crazy wiring or bad module or something's pinched, or, you go down a rabbit hole pretty quickly. I think the tool prices have gotten pretty wild. I mean, I know Snap-on specifically has always been kind of expensive, but they are exorbitant now, on top of the, inflationary effects on the prices, just kind of, they would become the Gucci of the tool world.
Yeah, I mean, it's, like you said, it's like, there's so many variables, right, that you have to account for that make it difficult. I mean, already originally the prices for tools were super expensive.
They
I
were
mean, if you
they, they were never cheap. I mean, I spent my
yeah,
first 5 years in the industry. Luckily I started young enough where I was living at home and I could afford to spend half my paycheck on the tool truck. But I think they they really were pushing that stuff when I was younger. The Harbor Freights and stuff like that have made it more reasonable. And it used to be cool, when I was younger. It was like, oh, I want this toolbox, and it's like, oh, it's 20 grand. Okay, great, I'll pay that. That's fine. And now I'm like, I wouldn't buy a $20,000 toolbox if it was the last thing on earth. That being said, I have 3 Snap-on boxes myself, but they're paid off, and the option really wasn't there. The quality was so low on the non-professional type toolboxes that you would buy. They really weren't serviceable, if you were using them all day, every day. And they've come up, so they have a little better options. And realistically, after all these years, I mean, I have Harbor Freight stuff in my box. There's stuff I'm going to use 2 or 3 times a year. That's just not. It's not easy to justify the price of using it if it's going to sit in my toolbox for most of the years. But there's also things that, I know the value of buying stuff that's warranted because, we're rough on our tools and, you're paying for the warranty on a lot of the stuff. But I think that's a big barrier. I think, again, there's a lack of, we're coming off of a generation. I mean, I'll be 39 in a few weeks and, I feel like I'm kind of the last bastion of my generation. And I was kind of the generation that just did it, just kind of came in and did the thing. Hold on 1 second for me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they were started pushing everybody into, once the government started subsidizing the student loans, I was of the first generation where the tech and the trades were really starting to get pushed out of the schools. There wasn't a lot of kids that knew that it was even an option. I did well enough in school, but I learned better with my hands, and I like the challenge of it, which is why I actually I did body. We had like a VOTEC program, and I did body work. And to me, I went into the mechanics because it was like sanding a fender, sanding a fender, sanding a fender. It doesn't matter what fender you're sanding. It's always, it's the same thing. And the monotony to me really just was not. I was interested in the changing. I like different stuff. I like to be challenged, and I think we're at a shortage now. COVID really kind of jumped the gun on a lot of the guys that were on the edge of getting out, the older generation. I also think that they left partially because I mean the highest paid guys were of course the first ones to get cut when the money stopped coming in. But I think I saw it when I was coming up, like we had spoken earlier about, coming up at the tail end of the carburetors. I think a lot of these guys, the average age of ownership in the automotive business, the last number I read, which I think is probably a few years old now, is 62 and a half years old. Right now, the average age of a technician in the United States is 40 years old. I think that's a large problem because there is a lot of older guys phasing out and there's really nobody behind it. And again, to try and throw these guys in the deep end with what you need them to do, they need to pay their cost of living like the rest of us. I understand that, but at the same time, it's like if you can only do brakes, you're really not worth $30 an hour. Um,
I
you
mean,
know,
there's been
it's
an
it's different.
evolving skill requirement.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an evolving skill requirement. And I mean, I think even the tech schools really, this isn't the kind of thing you can really learn from a book. And there's a thing, there's an analytical thought process that you have to possess. And I always tell my new hires and stuff like that, listen, you either got it or you don't. If you have it, I can make you much better at what you do. If you don't get it, there's nothing I can do. You can't get it. And actually, the funny thing is, our litmus test is actually when we clean the floors. If you can understand why, because we have a way we go about it, and it makes sense. My mechanic and I will go through and do it and think nothing of it. And then you got guys that are like pushing soapy water behind you, and it's like, listen, if you can't get how to clean a floor, there's not going to be much hope for you. But I really think that we're going to have a problem for at least the next 5 or 10 years. I do see a lot more of them trying to bring back the tech stuff to the schools. I really think they are doing that. Keith's right up there for you. So I think in 5 or 10 years, I think maybe we have a better shot. You have more kids getting pushed into, the schools are really starting to learn that, not everybody learns the same way. Not everybody's going to be a doctor, a lawyer, not even just mechanics, but skilled trades in general. My buddies and I are all in the different, all in different skilled trades. So it's like we're at the benefit of like, hey, I need some plumbing done at my house. And it's like, oh, well, I need brakes on my car. And it's like, okay, great. We'll trade those off. But I think the trades as a whole, are at an issue, but I think automotive is substantially worse than the majority. The barrier of entry is difficult. Trying to get hired with no experience, there's no like journeyman procedure or anything like that. I also think that there's a big issue of pay. The scales, the flat rate, the pay can be very convoluted in this business, and it seems like it's changing a little bit. My guys, I stay away from the flat rate and stuff like that. I find it really breeds people to cut corners. They're going at each other's throats because this one got these hours, and the guys are sitting here, and even though they're working, they're not making money and can't support them. So I basically run my guys on a salary basis, and some days that means if there's nothing going on, hey man, it's Friday, it's 3 o'clock, go enjoy your weekend, uh, and then conversely, there's days where it's like, hey man, we got to get these cars out, we got to hit it till 7:30, 8 o'clock, and, you know that's where the trade off comes. I kind of try to attract people, and it's how I kept the mechanic that I have now. I've worked for so many people, both good and bad, over the years that I kind of wanted to create a shop that does good work. We double check stuff. A lot of people say, "Hey, I figured this out," and put it in and send it down the road, and it comes back. I really like to, I'm a big proponent of quality control, making sure cars are test driven before and after they come into because you pull the thing right in, and it's like then you take it for a ride. Was that noise there before? Was it not? And it's having a consistency to how you operate really helps you be efficient and be professional. And I mean, in a market like we are, where I am, I mean, we are severely oversaturated, which also leads to the technician shortage. I mean, in a 5 mile radius, there's probably 30 or 35 shops, all doing different levels of work. I would say there's 3 tiers. There's several shops on the tier along with us, highly professional. Then you kind of got the middle ground guys like your big boxes and stuff like that, and then you have your hole in the wall guys that might not even be doing it legally. They're not registered, but they're just kind of fixing cars out of a garage on the side. But it's really hard to draw people in. It's hard work, it's hard work. It takes a lot of brain power. I mean, a big part of me buying out my partner, the long-term goal is to get myself out of the shop. It really just, 25 years of crawling around on the ground, leaning over stuff. I mean, my shoulders are shot, my back's shot, my knees are shot. It's a lot, crawling around in the concrete. It's not an easy business. And even if you get away from the physical stuff, I mean, the frustration of hunting a problem on a car. I mean, I had a BMW in here last week that, I had several hours into, and a part of it is a lack of in its totality. So I always say it's kind of like trying to solve a 250 piece puzzle with 200 pieces, and 20 of those 200 don't even go to that puzzle. So it's like the dealers and the manufacturers really, especially the high end ones, really try and keep it close to the vest they're trying to force the little guy out is really what's happening. They're making it harder and harder. I had tried to order a cluster recently, and they said it was restricted. They would not sell it to me. I'm like, "I'm sorry, you're not gonna sell me a $2,000 cluster?" They're like,
But
"Oh,
is
well,
this from,
no."
Mercedes?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, theft system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have my VSP ID and I have all the, I have all the programming and the security stuff and all the credentials, which is another thing that a lot of shops don't have. I get stuff all the time just because guys don't pay the $50 a year for the auto auth for the security gateway stuff on the Chryslers. I actually have one outside. Guy couldn't get in and diagnose the airbags because
Yeah, yeah,
and it's not, and I don't think it's them being cheap so much as, this is the barrier of the older generation. They don't know, it didn't used to be this complicated. I mean, I remember when I came up, the guys were still using the Snap-on bricks. It looked like a Nintendo. You stuck the cartridges in it.
yeah.
Then we went to the keys in the inline in the OBD connector for whatever car you might be using. And now we have, now things are much easier. But
Yeah, I mean, things really have changed. I mean, I remember there was like like you have an ABS scanner. Those,
oh
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
it
Yeah,
was just like
you had to have like a different one to get into it. And then, the airbag stuff, nobody really even used to mess with. It was just like, oh, the airbag light's on, take it to the dealer.
yeah, I mean, we've transitioned into, being just a mechanic. And then it's like part mechanic, part computer scientist. It's about knowing, like before, like you mentioned. I mean, there was just one module in the car. It was just the ECM. Everything kind of connected to it. And nowadays, it's you have a module for your transmission, engine, and then you have a module now for your windows, seats, steering wheel, a module for other modules. Like that
Yeah.
security gateway. How are you gonna get through that if you don't have the access to it? There's just so much to do that getting through just the teaching the fundamentals to a person wanting to get into the industry is like, look, you have to learn about the mechanical portion of a vehicle, which for us, we started out learning that, right? How an engine works, just purely mechanical things. And then we've, coincidentally progressed through the progression of vehicles themselves and kind of learned. And as they were introduced, the technology, we learned with it and we grew with it. So it was a little bit easier. But like you said, going into this industry right off the bat, there's just so much. It overwhelms a lot of people. And it's like, look, you have to get down the mechanical aspect. And now you have to do the technological aspect. And those are two completely different things.
No, I agree. When we came up, it was very much, you learned how things operated and, the theory of operation, and that kind of allowed you to understand why this module does this and talks to that. You could understand why because you understood the basics. Now there really isn't anything that is basic, so it's like you said, you kinda get crammed into everything in once, and it's hard to learn a theory. The other thing is, and I found over the years, a lot of guys coming out of school, it's not real world experience. They kind of, they're taking apart a car that's been apart, 25 times, so it's, there's little adversity and there's not a lot of real world application.
I mean,
This
and you're
this is
also
this is
working
a
on that
very
same car.
difficult business to learn from a book.
Yeah, and they don't understand that, hey, look, if you're like you said, you're taking apart the same car over and over again, that's just one particular year, make, model. And there's many different years, there's different makes and models, and just having even the same make and model, but a different year is going to bring significant changes. And so if you don't have that exposure and you're just, you're doing one vehicle at a time, you don't know how those differences translate between vehicles. Like, yeah, the fundamentals of how an engine works is kind of the same, but also there's a lot of different things that make it a little different as well. And so, like there's so much that goes into knowing like where to start and where to look and the just the education. Like you said, there was a lot of, phasing out of the industry for the, education portion because I mean, it's like a luxury, right? We needed that a long time ago. And so nowadays we're like, oh yeah, we need a lot of like computer scientist, and they push you to do like get a master's degree or a bachelor's in engineering, or just anything that sounds really good or your parents really push you to do. It's like, oh, we need a doctor or lawyer in the family. Okay, but
Not everybody's going to be a doctor or a lawyer.
yeah, and if everybody is a doctor or lawyer, you kind of
Right. It kind of defeats the purpose of the prestige of having that kind of position.
right. And I see a lot of people, I mean, they invest a lot of money. They take out student loans. They go through degrees, and they're like, I did all this and I'm not really good at it, or I don't really like it, and now I'm in serious debt right now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and
there's
it's and I've seen in my my in trying to hire folks, just kind of going through Indeed and seeing, I mean, some of these jobs, I mean, you're talking $250,000 bachelor degree and they're starting at 16, $17 an hour. And it's like, how can you how can you justify that? Now, that being said, I have an exorbitant amount of tools, but the tools make me money. The degree doesn't necessarily get you a job. It doesn't mean you're good at what you do. I can justify my spend where college isn't for everybody, desk jobs aren't for everybody. And I think they really did these kids a large disservice, along with, our industry and the other trades, by kind of pretending like they didn't exist for about the last 20 years. I graduated high school in '04, so I mean, we had a shop class. They did a little automotive. They touched on automotive, but it was more, um, it was more the vocational school. Yeah, what they call it, BOCES. You can go, it's like a half day your junior and senior year, and then go through, they have different trade programs. So we look to those to kind of keep an eye out for guys that are good. But I find I find a big problem there. It was the same problem when I went to school to try and get my foot in the door and kind of make some more money than I was making at the big box. Because everybody's like, okay, you got some experience, but I'm like, okay, well, maybe a degree will add to this. And I went to school, and it really seems like a vast majority of the people that were there because they thought it was easy, because their parents just wanted them to go do something. They're like, hey, I can do this. And then they get halfway through it and they just, their eyes go wide. And it's like, I didn't realize that it went to this extent, but it really is getting more and more difficult, even for season techs. I mean, these cars are getting very, very complicated. And earlier we were talking about like the theory of operation, and the problem now is we're getting away from sensible theory of operation to, it's like, this doesn't even make any sense why this would operate this way, but that's the way it operates. So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt as well. And, we spend a fair amount of money on getting as much information available to us as we can. But we sometimes you're still short information, and that's really where, experience and, your ability to think on your feet, it's like, okay, I know how this works, so even though the information isn't available, I can call back on my experience as to the theory of how this works. And, we should have grounds, we should have power, and, here's our signal wires. And it's like, you can kind of fill in the blanks sometimes. And then sometimes, I mean, it's not very often, because I don't like sending people to the dealer unless I absolutely have to. But probably once a month, it's not even that I can't figure it out, but with the being shorthanded, and some of these diagnostic, going into, a couple days of digging into these cars. And at some point, it's almost like I just got to cut bait. Beyond
yeah,
that,
I
it's
mean,
like
it's not
I have other
economical
customers, and,
at some point.
if I spend all my time on this one car, it's also very difficult to get customers to understand how you could need to pay 8 hours to figure out what's wrong with their car, and then still have to pay for it. It's like, well, what do you mean? You charged me 8 hours, well, it took me 8 hours to fix it. Obviously, it's, we don't charge anybody 8 hours because, we kinda take it on the nose, which is unfortunate on our part, but kinda just comes with the territory because, it's very difficult to explain to somebody who doesn't understand about cars how it could take 8 hours to figure it out. Uh, and be like, "Oh, well, here, I'll give you an ECU, you take it apart and put it back together. Let me know how that works out for you." Uh, but really, you know, the customers are more informed than they've ever been, with the internet. It's twofold. I think it's good. I don't think people know enough about their vehicles, and I think them knowing a little bit more about their vehicles would help them and help us. But there's also a lot of bad,
Yeah, I mean, a
and
lot of
if
it
you
can
don't if you
be
don't know enough about it,
misleading.
you don't know how to peel one from the other. Whereas I can look something up online and it's like because I know as much as I do, I'm able to determine what's valuable information and what's worthless information. Not everybody's capable of deciphering the difference. Well, it's like I read, well, you can read a lot of things. If you anything you believe, if you search hard enough on the internet, you'll find somebody that agrees with you.
Yeah, you can search up like, "Oh, how, you know, coffee's good for you," and then find another post that also says how coffee's bad for you. There's
Yeah.
everything. You can have a supportive article about anything, right? Or whichever side you're on, you can have something to validate your side. But, like you said, it's a lot of misleading information just because, you can have a single case that doesn't apply to you and it applies to like a different vehicle or something else. And people
Right.
will
You,
say,
you
no,
look.
but I looked online and this is what it said it is. Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
that's for that
there was
car.
this on a '99 Toyota Camry, but it's like, you have a 2016 Mercedes-Benz, and that's not
Completely
these
different
things are
thing.
not the same.
Right, how do you like, I mean, we have, like, this technician shortage, right? How do you see, or where do you see the biggest disconnect between what new techs are learning in school and what they actually need in the field?
I really just think that it's, there's just no substitute for real world situations. You know what I mean? You can create scenarios and that's reasonably valuable rather than looking from a book, just kind of setting up we had like a board where they would flip a circuit and you'd kind of have to go and figure out go through the order of operations to figure out what circuit was bad. But, it's on a board where you can get to everything and it's, you're not doing under dash gymnastics to try and poke at a wire that's tucked up under the dashboard. It's all done from an ideal setting. And I think, the majority of the real world application of that stuff is far from ideal. It's good for this school's good for teaching basics, but you have to want to and be able to convert that to a tangible asset in the real world. And not everybody's able to do that. Same thing goes for ASEs. The ASEs, I mean, I'm an L1 advanced certified master tech. I got my service consultant ASE, and it doesn't mean a whole lot to anybody but me. I mean, obviously with the L1, that's not very easy to do, but most of the stuff, it's like I know plenty of guys who are master techs because they're good at taking tests and not necessarily fixing cars. And then I know guys who have no ASEs that could fix things frontwards, backwards, all around. I have them. It was more of a, can I do it? And, I wanted to be able to say that I did it. And I mean, I just got my L1 not that long ago, but I've been a master tech for again, doesn't mean a whole lot, but the theory is kind of like when you go to the doctor. I mean, do you really care what school your doctor went to? I mean, you see his doctorate on the wall, and that's it shows some kind of stuff. I mean, you can see all my ASE stuff up there. I mean, we're a Blue Seal shop. We have been for a bunch of years. Doesn't mean a whole lot to people, but the few people that do, I mean, I'd rather be credentialed than not. There's not a lot of people that understand it.
I mean, the credentials is, more for others than
Yeah.
for your own self. You're like, "I know this stuff." If
It's right. It's just to help people that don't understand that I know what I'm doing.
There's a
It's very difficult to get that if you don't know what you're doing. I
That
mean,
is true, yeah, I mean, it's good fundamentals, you know, there's a joke, it's like, what do you call a doctor that graduated last in his class? A doctor.
doctor, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
he's
it.
still a doctor just because, you know, it really but it doesn't tell you what like, is he good? Is he a good doctor, right? And, you know, that just goes with experience. I mean, really, you have to be experienced, and you have to have access also to resources because a lot of the, you know, bigger issues we're seeing nowadays is just knowing where to go to learn about a system, to understand how a system works, just having access or knowing how to navigate a service manual, right? I mean, it's hard. Once you like, I have to look at, you know, one manufacturer may have this information under this section, the other has it under this other section. So you have to really know, you know, how to navigate things and, you know, how to learn, you know, like
Right, you have
learning how to learn.
they are it is very difficult to navigate some of those things sometimes. You know, what you and I would say is this, they call something else, which makes it difficult to find, you know. I had a Fiat in here the other day and I was looking for a Bluetooth control module and nobody could figure it out. And they're like, it's the Blue and Me module. I'm like, you really call it that? But that ended up being what it was, and it was like that's why I couldn't find it. It's like I'm trying to find like the wireless receiver module, and it's like you call it the Blue and Me module, and I would never know. I would never know to look at that. But it's I think that the practical side of what they're learning in school is good. Just have to they need guidance, and I think that's part of the problem also is the tech shortage is kind of led because I have the problem a lot here. When I have newer guys, I like to train them, but the reality is that I have so much going on, and because there are so few skilled techs, it puts more work on my shoulders and gives me less time to teach other people because I'm so caught up in just trying to cover overhead. And just like everything else, the cost of doing business has gone up exponentially. Trying to keep everything going and training somebody at the same time kind of leads you to be cynical in a way. It's almost like, I want to train them. I want to bring new techs in, but at the same time, if I got to pay $40,000 a year and do half the job for you, then I might as well keep the 40 grand a year in my pocket.
Yeah, and there's also like, you know, if you give them a job and they mess something up, now it becomes even more of a headache than if you were just to do it yourself.
Right,
And
because now I
it's like,
have to undo it and try and explain to them how not to repeat it without, scolding them. The best way I explain that to them is like, "Hey, listen, I didn't get where I'm at by happenstance." I was like, I've messed more stuff up in 1 week in my life than you've messed up in the year you've been here. My entire career has been trial by fire. I didn't come from an automotive family. I was just kind of the kid that pulled everything apart and was always curious how things worked. And I got big into cars really because of my age. I was the Fast and Furious generation, so that kind of the tuner culture thing got me a little bit for a couple of years. Then I shifted into building air ride trucks. I was into that for a long time, but as a business model, especially in the Northeast, building custom vehicles that you can drive 4 or 5 months out of the year is not a solid business plan. As well as the way those jobs go, it's like you get paid in chunks, and it's very difficult. But I've gotten away from that, and I've spent the last 5 or 10 years really honing in and on the diagnostics. I saw the writing on the wall, as it was coming. I'm like, I'm seeing these things get more and more complicated. There's a lot of pattern failure stuff because the QC at the manufacturer level has pretty much gone out the window. I believe that the end user has become the quality control. We'll give it to you, you shake the problems out, and then we'll decide if we want to fix them or, we'll just, for example, the Pentastar. Dorman actually backdoored Chrysler in repairing them because they're still putting in complete plastic units. After 100,000 miles, so many heat cycles, it warps, it starts leaking oil, coolant, everything else. And Dorman actually created an all aluminum one and patented it so that Chrysler couldn't even fix the problem they made, assuming that they would have fixed it anyway, which is questionable because it took Dorman a while to come up with that aluminum one. Because I mean, I would say we're
I've bought
probably
so
doing
many.
5 or 6 of those a month.
Man, I've bought so many of those, metal oil coolers
Oh yeah,
just because, I mean, I've gone through so many that I've just been buying them in bulk,
yeah.
it's always the same thing. It's always just that's where the leak's coming from, and, I mean, it's interesting why they would just why use plastic in that, right
And
in the center of the engine too,
right, if you put it
and
somewhere else, I could understand, but, like, you're heat soaking it on like, you're dead in the center, you got the intake over top of it, so you're not getting any kind of, and then the funniest thing about it is they got the cooler on top of it buried under, basically in a heat sink.
yeah, I mean, where's that airflow that's supposed to be dissipating that heat, it's not.
And everything's so shoehorned now, it's like trying to get any airflow in or around an engine's pretty, pretty nil as it is.
I mean, we've like you've talked a lot about just, these, small things, right? That translate to the bigger issues, which is, operation, vehicle build, education. And really, I mean, you put all these together and it just makes a big issue in the automotive industry. And, one thing that we're passionate about at OBD AI, not just the diagnostics, but the education, because what you can do is you can go, yeah, I mean, it can diagnose a vehicle for you. You can tell it what was going on and it will lead you to the right path, unlike, Googling something. But you can ask it a question about it. You would go in, select the vehicle, year, make, model, and then ask it a question about, hey, look, what do they call this on, just like in your case,
Right,
like
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
trying to find the Bluetooth module in this vehicle. Where is it? What is it called? And it would tell you because it has access to all that information for that vehicle, right? Whichever vehicle you choose. And so, but you can learn about a vehicle by asking a question like, hey, how does this system work? How does this work? Like if a wheel speed,
What's the correlation between this and that? How does
right?
this feed that? And, especially like with the CAN network stuff where, everything kind of bounces through everything else so that there's can actually be fewer modules, although that's not really the direction they've gone with CAN. But that was the original intention, was so that, you could have fewer modules and you had redundancy. You could, because everything was essentially now wired and paired, you could go in and find, hey, this, you could go from module to module and figure out kind of what was going on, and instead of having 17 coolant temp sensors, it can take the information from one sensor and communicate it to the cluster, to the training control module, to the engine control module, so
Yeah,
that it can,
you can transfer a lot of data instead of hardwiring it through just 2 data wires, right?
right.
So if every sensor has its own, line through the harness versus just having a module take care of those sensors in one allocated area and then transfer that information through 2 data lines, it's much more efficient, and that's what I mean, like you said,
Instead of
it's
having
the
the wires going into every module to tell it, and that's a good thing because that would make, that really would make figuring stuff out wildly complicated if you had one coolant temperature sensor wired in 4 different directions to 4 modules. How do how would you even, you lose one of those wires and all of a sudden you have the entire interior out of the car. It makes it easier to diagnose,
yeah. I mean, you fix one thing.
if you have the ability to
Yeah, you
decipher that
fix
information.
yeah, and then you fix one thing, like you said, you add that data system in a vehicle. You have the data bus for now, but now, there's that issue with, well, what if something happens to the system for communications? I mean, one module goes out or one line is shorted and now you have, a lot of you do a scan report and you have so many codes in every single module, and you're like, wow, there's just so much. Where do I start? And that's what also makes it easy using the AI diagnostics, because it goes in and it says, hey, look, these are all you know redundant codes, or these are codes that don't apply to the root cause, which is this, and this is what you have to take care of, and take into account that this is the common source module here that can cause all these other resonating codes to come on. And it does that analysis faster than I could if I were just to pull up a wiring diagram and start chasing module and data
Right,
wires
because I
and
mean, you can figure it out, but I mean, I find it very interesting, the OBD AI process. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I think it's helpful from an industry standpoint, because the quicker I can accumulate the information I'm looking for, sometimes I got to pull some from over here, and I got to pull some from one system, one from this system, and then I'm, chasing wiring diagrams and trouble trees and all that. And it's like, if you can minimize that or get all that information together in a faster process, it cuts out a lot of the legwork, because that's a good portion of the diagnostic stuff, is just figuring out, first you got to figure out what's wrong with it, and where the problem lies, and then you have to figure out how to determine how that problem occurred. Is it a bad line? Is it a bad module? Is it this? Luckily, sometimes you get lucky and you get, hey, every module that's on this network is saying that it can't talk to the ABS module. Well, I can make an educated guess based on that, and then go test, make sure I got my powers and grounds and everything into that module, make sure I got, communication and continuity. When you have things going back and forth between 2 and 3 modules, it can get overwhelming. I got papers all over the place with the diagnostic trouble trees and everything to go
yeah,
through.
but you sit there and I mean, diagnosis is different than doing mechanic work, right? It's like a whole different thing. You're not even on the car itself, but usually you're just on the computer or
Yeah.
paper and just tracing things and trying to figure out where things go and
Yeah,
how
I
they
mean,
relate and what the common cause is. And essentially you become this investigator, trying to find like
yeah,
what.
yeah, it's like CSI,
Yeah,
you really do. You spend more time on the computer and reading it and finding where that connector is in the car. I mean, the actual process of testing it isn't that tough. It's getting to it,
finding where it
knowing
is.
what you need to test and what you're looking for, and, making sure you have the right connector diagrams and pinouts and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's one problem that I've run up against that's caused me to diversify my information systems, is sometimes you'll get a wiring diagram and it's like, well, you got all the pins, but they don't match the pins that are in the car, the colors don't match, and then it's like, what do you do? So
Yeah.
you kind of have to
Yep.
backtrack, and if you have all that information at your fingertips, you can be like, okay, this one should be here, that one should be there. So let me test continuity between these two. And if those two are good and the powers and grounds are where they are, well, then I can assume that the pinout of the connector is correct and somebody just changed the wire colors. But, that would take 45 minutes, an hour maybe, depending on how large of a connector it is. Be back in the office, back and forth on the computer, this information system, that information system, trying to figure everything out. Uh, and now we have, now they're starting to throw the ADOS stuff at us as well, which is a whole nother layer of complication. Uh,
Just one more system. We'll
yeah,
add another one.
it's not getting any easier. That's for
No,
sure.
it's definitely not. And look, vehicles just in the past 5-10 years have progressed in technology like no other. It's been such a huge leap every single generation of vehicles that come out. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with. Hey, I just learned this system now, and then something new comes out. You're like,
Yeah,
great.
just
Well,
just
now
about the time. Yeah, because I mean the progression used to be much slower,
you're
and
right,
I
right.
think that's why we lost a lot of the guys I even saw some of the older guys that were older when I was young and first came in. They saw the fuel injection stuff and they're just like, "Eh, I think it's time to get out of here." And I think similarly, that's what kind of led to the exodus of the last 5 or 10 years. I think, with the average age of shop ownership, like we talked earlier, again, I think this figure's 4 or 5 years old, but it was 62 and a half years. With the average age of a tech at 40 years old, it's very hard. If it was a lower age range, you could kind of pass the information down. There becomes such a gap between somebody because there's not a lot of guys that have been doing it for 5 or 10 years. Most guys, I think the number is 75% of the mechanics in the industry have been in for 15 to 20 years at minimum. And that's a pretty wild number, especially when you consider the average age to be 40, and what this kind of work does to your body. And, I don't know a whole lot of 70-year-old mechanics, we'll put it that way. I think that the diagnostic stuff kind of opens up the length of a career that you can have because you can kind of get away from the physical labor of it, which is why I kind of started moving towards the diagnostic stuff, kind of for the same reason I wasn't interested in the body work. I like the challenge. I like the changing. I wish it would slow down a little bit, but it's just as soon as you learn one system, it's like, okay, I got this, and then the next one comes out and you're starting all over again. But I like that challenge, and I like that it allows me to stay within the industry and kind of, let the young kids get their bodies beat up, let them
Yeah.
hammer out the wheel bearings and all that stuff. I spent all my years doing that. Now I like to use my brain more than my body.
Yeah, I mean, and it takes a lot of like, if you wanna do this, right, you wanna go into this industry, you have to like just a challenge of solving the issue. And, I like it when a car comes in and they've been at 3 other shops and they can't find the problem. That just gives me like a little boost to like really wanna solve,
I'm
and get down to that,
very much the same way, and I take it as a challenge, and it's like, well, one, I would say, I've kind of actually become one of the few guys around that gets that kind of work. There's probably one or two other shops in my area that have guys that are as qualified as I am to do that kind of stuff. There's a lot of parts changers, a lot of guys that are guessing. They know just enough to get themselves in trouble. Probes, for example, I mean, a valuable tool, but if you don't know exactly what you're doing with that thing, you can get yourself in some very expensive trouble very quickly.
yeah, they just
Yeah,
something doesn't work,
right,
let's put power on this wire.
right,
Well,
yeah.
where does that wire go through? Why are you doing that? Do you know how it's
Once
like
once you once you let the smoke out of them, they don't work as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, look, there's a and that's what happens, like, you have a lot of older generation that grew up on that mechanical side of
Yeah, it was
vehicles.
binary. It was, power, ground,
That's it, yeah, if
maybe
there
maybe
was
a
just
maybe
power
a
ground.
re maybe a return, on a, like a thermistor where you have like a variable return or like a fuel level sensor,
Right,
variable
yes.
resistance, but that was about the extent of it.
Yeah, now
OBD1 stuff, it was like, oh, something failed long enough, it would just burn the driver out of the ECU, where now the computers are smart enough to shut the gate so they don't cook themselves. But I mean, I had somebody in here recently and it was like, I don't understand why I have all these problems. I'm like, well, you jumped your car backwards. Well, why do I need three modules? Well, because these modules are not designed to have that. And then I found out not only did they have one car, but they had two cars hooked up with the jump box with the jumper cables backwards. And she was telling the dealership that brought the car to me, one of my used car dealers. She's like, yeah, I don't know, it just I got up and it didn't work this way. And then she's talking to us, she's like, well, I took my friend to work and I fell asleep in the car. And I'm like, oh, so you jumped the car backwards? She was like, no. And it wasn't malicious on her part. She wasn't trying to lie. She just like literally did not have She literally did not have the knowledge, just a simple ignorance, that she just did not possess. She didn't even know that she did something wrong because she didn't possess enough information, which is another thing that I think they really need to push. Just basic knowledge really would save people a lot of headaches. The amount of engines I replace in a year because, here in 2025, with all the information we have available to us at our fingertips all day long, we walk around attached to a computer, and you drive your car overheating for 3.5 hours. You're all aluminum engine at that, and it's like, well, why is it messed up? And it's like, I only drove it for a little while. Well, how long was a little while? Oh, yeah, I don't know. It was like 70 or 80 miles. I'm like, yeah, this thing's cooked. Well, but it's just a head gasket. Not anymore. I had one.
Yeah.
I actually had a guy who drove it so long that it lifted and stretched the head bolts enough where it got coolant down into the threads of the head bolt. So
Mm.
when we backed the head bolt out before we even pulled the head, halfway to the very bottom of it has had
What?
coolant in it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that takes an impressive amount of overheating to accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of what, like, we also try to do at OBD AI is get that education, 'cause even, like, that translates from a consumer and to an early technician that's just going into the field, right? "Hey, do I have to pull a service plug on this hybrid to work on this system? Do I have to, or where is it located, right? How long is gonna take you to find that?" I mean, that just it's sort of just having, let's say, like, I have a person that I can talk to and just chat with, like, I have a Justin here. I can just ask questions and he can give me a reply pretty easy because 'cause he's been through so much, right? And so any early person going into this can have it not as a diagnosis tool, but as somebody there that they can talk and converse with. And, that's what
Kind of bounce ideas almost like, am I on the right track with this? Is my
exactly,
thought
yeah.
process correct?
Is there something that I've missed? Could it be this instead? Or is there something that you've seen from other cases where this was the issue to this exact same sort of, symptoms and codes that we're seeing? And so, I think, we're coming out with it maybe later this summertime, but be a real game changer for those that are super experienced, just to help you kind of, be as like a tool or just somebody to throw ideas off the wall with, and those that aren't as experienced but just need guidance, and then hopefully that would really help those out in all different types of levels. But just as key takeaways here and a conclusion from everything you've said, Justin, I mean, this has been incredibly insightful just hearing you talk and go through all this. I mean, if there's one action you think shop owners or industry leaders should take after hearing this, what would it be?
I mean, really just, take the time to vet, vet your techs, help them the best that you can. I mean, some are obviously easier to help than others, but I think that as a shop owner, I think it's really our job to kind of foster the next generation in. I don't think that shutting down people with minimal experience right away is the answer. I think that while there are outside sources that really could adjust and change the technician shortage for the better, I really think the biggest part of it is going to be played by us, the shop owners, the guys my age that are kind of coming up. We're kind of the torch holders right now, and if we don't assist these kids coming up and teach them the way, who else is there? Again, it's very hard to throw these kids in there because I can't convey 25 years of knowledge to somebody in 10 minutes. A lot of what I do is based off of my knowledge, my experience, past experiences, and just kind of showing guys how to navigate the new world as technicians versus the mechanic stuff. There really is a change, and I think we need to be the ones to kind of foster the change. And once they fix it at an institutional level, and we can start getting some young guys in the pen, I really think it's going to be on us to guide them get them where they need to be. Because again, the school stuff is good for basics and theory, but anybody that's been in the industry for a while will tell you that that'll only go so far. You really need, like you said, somebody to bounce stuff off of. I bounce stuff off of other people as well. Sometimes I'm stuck and it's just like, I call one of my buddies like, "Hey, does this make sense? Like, am I on the right track here?" Because sometimes you can get in a problem, you really get pigeonholed and you get tunnel vision and you're thinking one way. And even my mechanic that works for me now, I'm bringing him, he's very good. He's very tech. I'm trying to teach him more and more into the diagnostic stuff, and I'll bounce stuff off because he understands theory. So it's like, hey, is this good? And, even just a second
Yeah,
set of
fun.
eyes sometimes really is valuable. Yeah, I mean, really, I think as shop owners, it's going to be our duty to ensure that the new generation, once we get some more of them in here, really, this is how stuff works. This is, we really have to be the ones to guide how the industry is going to go from here.
And for those that are curious just about bolt mechanics and or who want to follow your work, where's the best place they can connect?
My Facebook, we're Bolt Mechanics, Instagram, Bolt Mechanics, and boltmechanics.com.
Perfect. Well, Justin, again, thanks again for joining us.
Hey, Mick, it was great. Had a good conversation.
Yes, sir. And but yeah, that's it for this episode of OBD AI Insights, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks again.
Sounds good, man. Have a good one.
You as well. Take care.